I'm going to start off by saying that coming from somebody, me, who is a lover of God, believer in Christ, mother of two, my background is in early childhood education, child development, and just a regular person in society, I would have to credit them for killing my parents. Before we get into this episode, I do want to state that a lot of the topics that we will be discussing and unpacking may be triggering to some. When we have these conversations, a lot of it comes out very passionately because it's what we believe in, it's what we've researched. So we will provide the resources and also things to kind of justify some of the points that I was able to bring about and give you those links to why what I can say may be credible. Take it for what it is. Again, this is a case that's getting quite hot right now because it's still going on. So definitely do your research and make informed decisions about this case. And I hope you enjoy this episode. Today's podcast episode is going to be about something that is so near and dear to my heart, something I've been obsessed with and have been researching so much. It's going to be about the Menendez Brothers. It's been picked up again by lots of media outlets, TikTok, and their new show, Netflix's new show. I have my brother here.
Hello.
He is a media productions graduate. He went to university for that. My background is early childhood education. I have my bachelor's degree in child development. So, how are we going to start this off?
Oh my gosh. Well, we have even though we have very different educational backgrounds, I feel like for this particular subject matter and case, we can go about it in different perspectives.
I know, because we're 11 years apart. He's a Gen Z generation, I'm millennial generation, and there's always just different mindsets with certain topics. So this one is going to be about the case. I'm going to start off by saying that coming from somebody, me, who is a lover of God, believer in Christ, mother of two. My background is in early childhood education, child development. I would have to credit them for killing my parents. I think that was...
Oh, we're starting it off
I
strong
think they
here.
did a good job. I totally agree that... I'm totally in agreement with that. It's not the best thing to do. I don't recommend it, but I could see why it was done. I could see how I would want to justify that. I don't know. What do you think? I kind of dragged him into this, so.
No, this is starting off great. No, so intense. Let's back it up a bit.
Okay, fine. Sorry.
Let's back it up a bit.
Okay.
We're getting introduced to the topic and Ata's, my sister's point of view on it, which is so cool, it's gonna be amazing. It's gonna be a really dense episode.
Okay.
But let's go back on how we got introduced to this case. So I remember it was sometime last year, because we don't live together. I live with our parents, and then my sister has her own family.
Yeah.
And but we would only see each other at family gatherings, family functions. And she was over one day, and I don't know, the thing that you need to know about our family is we're all really into psychological horror, true crime, thrillers. Me, my sister, our brother, and my sister's partner, all big into true crime, psychological, everything. Mm-hmm. And there's this one gathering, I forget when, sometime last year. And then Ata was like, oh my gosh, have you heard of the Menendez case? And I'm like, no, I don't. And then you went off on a tangent.
I like to trigger him with sick details. So I didn't even tell them, okay, it's these two beautiful brothers and this and that. I went full in. I'm like, did you know these guys were blah blah blah? And he's like, what?
She went straight for the jugular, talking about cinnamon and vinegar and abuse, and I was like, oh my god, Ata. Just like how she prompted this episode, just going in about her stance on it.
Yes, they should do that. No.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but you found this case. You told me back then you found this case through TikTok, right? So
yes.
How was that like?
This was back in 2021. TikTok brought up the story again, and these are teenagers usually. It's a younger crowd. And they pulled up the case again, and it it was Eric's testimony that captured my attention, because firstly, I see this beautiful man and he's crying, and
Wow.
I'm a very empathetic person. So when I saw him crying, I'm like, what happened? I listened. He said stuff about a toothbrush, about his dad, about being and stuff, and I went into a rabbit hole, and I was a bit obsessive over it until I spoke to my boomer coworker and said, "Oh, back in the '90s, did you hear about the Menendez case?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, those two, they totally did it for money, and they faked this blah blah blah." And I'm like, you know what? Yeah, that's true, because I'm like, people who go through such abuse like that, with the things that they have, like they lived in a mansion, everything was paid for them. I'm like, it's probably, yeah, they probably did that. So I stopped looking into it until recently. You brought up
Yes, the show,
Netflix show, and even though I don't agree with a lot of what the Monster series did,
yeah, we'll get into that,
how they portrayed the story, I'm glad it was even brought up. Like, I'm glad that Ryan Murphy did a show featuring the Menendez brothers in the Monster series, because it helped me to watch the series and then go back and did my own research. I don't agree with a lot of it, but had it not been the show, I think it would have been just simmering within the surface and not having the craze that it's currently having.
But even before the show, you discovered it back in like 2021, 2022 through TikTok. So you think maybe it's like something about like our generation, maybe millennial and Gen Z's obsession with true crime as a generation, like about older cases, and they I guess they were the first ones to bring it back to life as well.
It's the feeling, media, right? It's the feeling generation. It's the empathetic generation, where it's just like they want the justice. They want to be all like, there's a reason. They want to go all gung ho. There's always a talk back to that. Yeah. Whereas the boomer generation, way before ours, it's more like, if you see it, it's there. If you don't see it, it's not there. And it's just like, that's what it is. But with us, we dive deeper, especially your generation. They dive deeper. They get more obsessive. It helps that they have a platform to do so. And I'm glad, because if it wasn't for that, I don't think it would have been picked up. And I think they would still be just chilling there in prison, because right now, as we speak, the DA in California, the district attorney, was able to send a recommendation for them to get out immediately. But it has to go through steps, it gets me so nervous, because this case is still going on. Like, they're real people. They haven't died. Like, a lot of the cases that were very high profile, a lot of those people are dead now. So it's just like, you don't think about them. But right now, as we speak, these boys was served an injustice and are still serving time for something that should have gotten a manslaughter plea, which is just like maybe 22 years for each parent. Well, 11 years at the time. So for each parent would have been 22 years. They've been in prison for 35 years now. Just like, it bothers me. I watch the case a lot in my spare time. I research it. I watched 3 hours one time. She got
re-obsessed with the Menendez case after the TV show, which, let's go back to the TV show. So after you stopped looking at at TikTok because you didn't believe them. Like,
remember I told you, I'm like, oh, they're joking, and you're like, why? And of course, the feeler generation, they're just like, why? Mental health.
Exactly.
They were sick. They were abused, and I'm like, no. My boomer disciplinary growing up with boomer, they're like, no, like they wanted money. That's what it is.
Yeah, and how this conversation came about was at a recent family gathering. It was you and your daughter's birthday.
It's always
end of September. It was always like these random like gatherings that we just get into like random conversations about things that we're obsessed with. So I how I got introduced to it was, I'm a huge fan of. I have mixed feelings about him, but I am a fan of a lot of Ryan Murphy's shows. I've watched a lot. I love TV. I love watching TV since that's what I studied in
media production.
In media production, exactly. And he's one of the biggest showrunners in the world, and he can make anything.
Don't get me wrong, Monsters was incredible. If it wasn't based on a true story, and if it wasn't still going on, and if those portrayals and those situations were true, he did a fantastic job. The casting was great, the acting was great. He really did a really good job with in my opinion, with Erik and Lyle Menendez Monsters series. I don't like it because I've been obsessed. I've watched a lot of their trials, like the real people, and the depictions are totally off.
And that's why I was surprised when we did get together on your birthday, and then I brought it up. I was like, oh, Ate, like, because I heard that it was announced, because I also watched the previous season, Dahmer. For those that don't know, Monsters is a anthology series created by Ryan Murphy. If you don't know who Ryan Murphy is, by the way, he's one of the biggest showrunners in the world. He created Glee and American Horror Story. And Monsters, the first season aired back in 2022, and it was about Jeffrey Dahmer.
I feel like he's sick.
He is sick.
He's a very sick person.
He's very known for being, one, extremely controversial, because like our family, he's obsessed with true crime and obsessed with psychological horror.
The characters end up all dying and being miserable.
Yeah.
Like Glee? Like half the cast is dead. No.
Okay, that's a different topic. That's like outside of the show. That's one of his happier shows, even though it had a tragic curse put on it, which that's a whole other topic and discussion. But so Monsters, the first season was about Jeffrey Dahmer, which we're not going to get into that. My sister hasn't seen it, but I personally, this is why, the thing about his shows too is that they're so addicting. Yeah. Like they have like this,
because it's sick, and we like sick.
It's sick. It's like it's enticing.
Low key, we are all sick people in the inside. We're all very sick.
No, I think it's just like we like the unknown. We like darkness. We like to dive into things that at least for me, like I just didn't think was real or it could happen, right? Because like, you know, everyone in life, like especially our family, like we all go through things. Yeah. But like,
not to the severity of sick.
No, not to any severity of sick. But that's what's fascinating about it, is that some people, which is what you're trying to do in this podcast, is talk about like, you know, child development and parenting and all that, and how that, you know,
ties into the sick. Ties into the sick.
That's our tagline for this episode. Erik and Lyle Menendez, sick.
There is psychology behind why we like those things. We were talking during breakfast that,
and Ryan Murphy likes, you know, he grabs our attention by putting those onto screen, and he has his deal with Netflix, and he, you know, released this show is on Netflix. It's available on Netflix. Both seasons are out. But yeah, Monsters, the Erik and Lyle Menendez case, was the second season, and I find it very interesting that he chose them as like a second season topic to discuss. Really? Because the first season, it's understandable because it was about Jeffrey Dahmer. Like he's one of the most prolific serial killers.
He was hot at that time, so he snatched that hot moment.
And he's like a killer. Like he like, you know, spent a lot.
But did he get manslaughter? Like Guy? What's his name?
Ed Gein. Ed Gein. Which, fun fact, Monster Season 3, which will be coming out in the next year or two, is centered around Ed Gein, who was
what was his sentencing? Serial. Or did he just...
Ed Gein was like...
No, Dahmer.
Oh, Dahmer? Oh my gosh. Dahmer he got caught by like...
And he got life?
And he got he got life. Or
see, and that's what I don't understand. Life with no parole, right? It's the same thing as the brothers.
Or actually, don't quote me on that.
I have no idea. I don't know Dahmer. I don't like sick, like eating stuff. Like I can't.
Yeah, he's a well-known cannibal as well.
Yeah. What struck me with the boys? Well, they're men now. Oh my god, they're so old. They're like 50. Yeah. Erik was only 18.
That's the thing. Like Dahmer was like, he was a well-known. Like it makes sense for him to be labeled a monster because he literally like a bunch of people. But with Erik and Lyle Menendez, first of all, as we mentioned, the case is still going on, and
there's new things coming up. They could possibly be freed,
and there's a lot of controversy and speculation about
whether they should go. Yeah, so they're divided.
Whether they're actual monsters or not. Like
they're
that's
not
the
monsters.
That's the big question about the show.
I credit them. I credit them a lot with. It's. Oh my god, I'm already going to get canceled. It's my first episode.
I know, right? We talked a lot. We said a lot of stuff. Yeah. We need to put a warning before that.
I know.
Well, let's talk about our experience watching the show. So, you watched it twice.
I watched it first, just as if I didn't know the case. Because, again, it was like 3 years before, like 3 years before that I've really looked into the case, but not really because I talked to my coworker about it. And I was like, yeah, maybe that's true. I watched it and I'm like, this is weird. Like, why are they incestual? Why is it that Lyle was so crazy? And like, I'm like, okay, I was actually believing that this was a true depiction until my obsessive ass was just like, okay, let's put this away. Thankfully, Netflix dropped a documentary of the actual brothers speaking and saying their side right after the Monster series.
Yeah,
which saved them so much because you get invested in the fictional characters, you get invested in those actors, you get invested in the story, and then you get obsessed. You have your obsessive phase with that, and then you go watch the documentary, and they're like, "Wow, this is something that is a lot deeper that the show didn't." Capture really, because the show was a portrayal of many different sides, and then they kind of they kind of basket it to you and be like, you do your own research and you figure that out and you make your own view on it. So when we watched the documentary, I'm like, oh my god, this is horrible. You really feel for the actual brothers because of how they were crying on the stand, the little things that they were talking about that made you feel like this, you can't lie about these things, you can't fake this kind of emotion. So then when we finished the documentary, Daniel was like, now that we know this information, let's go watch it again and see how accurate it is. So we watched Monsters again after the documentary, and we're like, yeah, no, this is totally this is just all for entertainment purposes. They really did Lyle, for sure, an injustice of his character.
Yeah, so I haven't seen the documentary. I feel
good.
like I should. I feel like it's, as you said, a much better representation of the case and their characters, because I only watched the show through once, and I personally didn't like it. I'm not going to get into like you talked about, like the acting, which I do think that's like the one thing about this show that I did love, was the acting was amazing.
But the thing is, like, even when I looked,
a lot of the writing and the directing and how it was made, especially compared to Dahmer, wasn't as good.
When I looked at the acting, because I've watched the trial, like how the real boys cried on the stand. I've watched it many, many times. When I go see Nicholas Chavez and Cooper Koch do it, nothing compared to like the actual thing. When you watch the actual thing, you think their acting was kind of phony and really forced. You cannot capture that kind of emotion if you never went through that severity of abuse.
Exactly.
Which, let's talk about the actual people, because that's what really provokes me to say, like, I credit them for killing their parents. I'm sorry. Why do you credit them for killing their parents? When you choose to conceive and bring a child to this world, that's your choice. That's not theirs. And when you have these innocent kids, these innocent, beautiful boys in this situation, and you destroy them and basically murder them on the inside, like, I'm speechless now. Like, I just, like, you already killed them with with how you raised them. And I could see why they made that decision, because Erik was still getting abused up until he was 18. Lyle's was only a window of time. It was from 6 to 11 or whatever. But because he was a favorite child, his dad left him alone because he had the potential. I think Erik was like he was spoiled goods. Like like they thought that he was such a useless person.
Okay, I guess that's accurate in the show as well. I know we're not talking about the show as much right now, but yeah, because I don't know the real case. I learned it all from my sister, and I only watched through the Monster show once. Yeah. So I'm looking at it from a different lens than how you are.
Yeah, because what we know just from the actual people is that they were physically, emotionally, and sexually abused. But when you watch the trial, there's so many little things that they talked about in their childhood. Like, the mom was a nutcase. They would say, like, how she would burn the food all the time and, like, give them burnt food.
Oh, wow.
And how, like, Lyle went to soccer camp and she would always hang up his calls. And this guy was 11 only. I remember going to an overnight trip with my grade 8 class or grade 7 class. And you had, like, a half an hour window of time to, like, call your family. So I would call, and there would be a message on their end saying, like, you're getting a call from blah, blah, blah. And they know it was you because it was a location, and then you say your name, and then they press 2 to get to connect. So that's what happened to Lyle and the mom. Like, the mom heard that it was a call from him, and she would just hang up, and she would never take the call. And as a little boy, you're like, okay, wow, I'm not worthy to be talked to. Like, I'm gone. I want to talk to my parents. And he called every day, and he would see all the other boys calling their parents. His teammates would be like, yeah, I talked to my mom, I talked to my dad. Once he said that, when he testified to that, he would, like, his eyebrows were quivering. Like, you could tell that was something that he remembered vividly, and that hurt him it hurt his inner child, that his mom didn't even want to talk to him, and he so really wanted to talk to his mom. So he would just like pretend to like stand there and pretend to talk, and like I could sympathize with that, because I could feel that. I will never understand sexual abuse. I can never understand that, but like I can understand how a young child would feel.
Yeah, so it's not even like the gross, like, awful things that were done to them sexually, but it was also the mother's like neglect.
Yeah, bits and pieces.
It's bits and pieces, and it all like adds up in your childhood.
And then it blows up. You add sexual abuse. You add the fact that like his brother was still getting abused, because Lyle was good. He could have like, and this is why the whole thing about them killing them for inheritance or money. He even wrote in a letter, this wasn't for money. This was betrayal on the mom's part, and this was him trying to help his brother, because they also felt like they were gonna get killed by Jose. Because Jose was a really popular executive, like music executive. He was very, very rich.
Yeah, he was the CEO of a big entertainment company.
Yeah, he was with like Clive Davis, and like that whole thing, connection of that, like they're all predators, I feel. But anyways.
Wow.
So Lyle even said that like his dad would rather be caught in a murder than caught as like a child. Like, he did not want to ever be blamed for a child, or be called out for child abuse or child action. So when Lyle went up to him, when he found out that Erik was still abusing him sexually, he said, like, I'm going to tell everybody you're never going to touch him again. That, in Monsters, was correct. His dad was like, do it, and you're going to see. And so he already knew that extent was him saying, like, I'm going to kill him. So that's why Lyle and Erik was scared and defended themselves. And they had to plan it and buy shotguns, because they were even saying, like, we're not murderers, we're not evil people, we're not crazy, but we had to prepare for it just in case, because the dad was the one that said, like, hey, I will kill you if you do that, because he would not ever want to be known as a child murderer. He would rather be known as a murderer. He was freaking crazy.
It's crazy, yeah, but they loved him.
They loved him too, and that's what I don't understand, is that, like, and inside in child psychology, is that, like, if you have an abusive parent or parents, for you to still come out as strong people, and I'm guessing that their family was very involved too. They're half Cuban, half Scandinavian, so like Spanish families are very like together. There's a lot of togetherness for that. So there was probably many people that still help them mold them into great people, because if you have two evil parents like that, you're bound to be evil in your bloodline. I think they, especially how they were acting like in prison, could have been like, they could have had
from their generational trauma.
They could have like shown their true colors in prison, but they're doing amazing, beautiful things in prison, so they're really good people. So I don't understand that part.
Well, maybe back when they were being abused by their parents, and up until the murders, they were very disassociated. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Disassociation might have played a part in it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, even during the trial, like, you could see Erik zoning out into a lot of things, because he can't remember a lot of them, because he would just like, he couldn't hear questions. He also had like an intellectual disability as well. He had like hearing problem, a stutter, like he had many disabilities. Yeah. And like he had a hearing problem, and they ignored it because they didn't want him to have a hearing problem, so he was just like
So they just like left it.
They
That's
left
so
it.
Sad.
Like, neglect was a huge part. Yeah. Emotional neglect for sure.
And that's crazy because they were rich. They could have gotten the resources to help them out in many different
But the
ways.
dad was very controlling.
Yeah,
so
the dad
like
was very
even to have
controlling.
friends, like the dad wouldn't let them have friends because then like Lyle even said like he played soccer and played many sports, but his dad wouldn't let him hang out with his teammates because Lyle's such a nice person. He wouldn't be competitive with them. Just something small like
Something
that.
small, yeah. And they were also, well, in the show, they depict the parents as very controlling of Lyle's like love life as well.
Yeah,
And
and,
even,
and
like-
at 19, he got his girlfriend pregnant, and the dad paid her to get an abortion.
Wow.
So it was very controlling, and I had to fight off a lot of TikTok people commenting like,
Oh, no.
all these things, and I'm such a freaking fangirl. It's actually so sad. They were all like, "Oh, these murderers, don't let them out," and blah blah blah, and like come up with assumptions, base it on the Netflix show. I'm like, you did not watch the whole trial. You need to watch the whole trial, and you'll change your mind.
Oh, man. But that's so interesting how you're such a fangirl and like you're so involved in the case, because even especially back then during when the case was hot back in the 90s.
They had no social media though.
I know, but they still had their fans and they had like a following.
Yeah.
Even back then.
And that's what they were saying was that the Gen X generation for sure, and during the 90s, you didn't have anything. You had no outlet or platform like today. And even the mentality, younger kids, like if something's going on, you tell people, you express your emotions. Therapy is very, very important
Yes.
in yours and mine's generation. They didn't have any of that. Again, like it's what they saw in the media. So what isn't there, and what's there is there. Like it's all like black and white back then. So it's just like you either see them as a murderer or you believe what they were saying. There was no like deep dive into things.
Exactly. And with the power of social media and the internet.
Yeah,
now,
it's a different time.
Different time.
Imagine going to jail in 1990 and then coming back in 2024 and you're like, what the heck happened to this world? Like they're gonna have such a culture shock
I
if they do get
know.
when they do get out. I'm gonna try to speak that into existence because I would get into a depression if they didn't get out.
And also a big thing that was talked about in this case and depicted in the show is sexual abuse against men.
Yeah.
Because
It's like how? Like there was no tools to do that. It was
more
especially incestually
taboo or like stigmatized back
Yeah.
in the late 80s, early 90s. But now it's a different time.
Because
and people
before
are believing all victims, not just and I guess the culture shifted where we're having conversations about men being abused.
Yeah,
sexually,
because
the possibility of men being sexually abused, which
Yeah.
which can happen. It's not a gender thing at all.
Because before, during that time, men was still known as the provider, the strong person. Women was still more vulnerable. There were still women staying home and being a caregiver. Now that times are shifting, we are realizing that men do cry and
Yeah.
have emotions. So they really it was like wrong place, wrong time
Yeah,
for
I was gonna
them.
say that,
Because
yeah.
if it happened now, definitely manslaughter.
And do you think that shift in culture is why the DA is doing this resentencing? And
I
is it
think he's
meaning,
doing
like-
it because the topic is so hot right now.
Yes.
And he even said there was like letters flooding his door,
Wow.
petitions like crazy. So I could imagine him being like, you know what, I'm going to look at this again, and him being like, okay, wow, this is a tough situation.
And that can be attributed to many things on why that's happening now. I guess it's because of the show. Because
and honestly, I do have to give the show the credit. I don't like the depictions are totally wrong. I feel a lot
and
is
that's
right,
the ironic
but like
thing
it's
about
wrong.
it. Yeah.
But if it wasn't for the show, and I will always credit the show, it gave an impact to me because at first, when I first knew about it, I felt so empathetic, and then I thought, okay, maybe not. And then the show happened. We watched it for fun, and then you're like, wow, like again, it was a portrayal of many different stories. Take it for what it is, basket, put it in a bow. Do what you want with the information. So that's what I did. I researched it. I watched hours and hours of the trial, and I'm like, I now have made an informed decision that they were extremely abused. They did. There was a huge reason why they killed their parents, and I agree with it.
And that's a big thing that Ryan Murphy wanted audiences to take away from that is because he got a lot of heat as well. He got a lot of controversy because of the poor portrayal, of Lyle, the fact that, you know, a big controversy of monsters. I know, going back to the show, but a big controversy of monsters both seasons is that Ryan Murphy and his team never reached out to the victims. And he kind of like exploited
except for one guy, Eric's character, Cooper Koch. He was the only one that genuinely cares for them and who has done research and really cares about the story. Nobody else seems like they watched anything or did anything. They just capitalized off of the horrible situation that they were in.
But there's this interview with Ryan Murphy where he speaks out about the controversies, being interviewed about it, and he sort of says, like, I wanted to bring the story back to life, to have these conversations about men being abused because of the culture shift. And also, as you said, like, he did it in like the way they portrayed it in the show, which personally for me I don't think was successful, which is why I didn't like the show that much. He tried to do it in a Rashomon type way, which Rashomon in a method of storytelling means that different characters are telling different sides of the same story. Yeah, and that's what they're doing, what they did in the show. Like, you saw it from the parents' perspectives, you saw it from the kids' perspectives, you saw it from Dominic Dunn's perspective.
Oh god, Dominic Dunn was such a waste of time.
Yeah.
Like, who cares?
Yeah.
But what did you have hoped for, like, to make it to your standard? Like, what was missing?
It's just like, the mere existence of the show makes me uncomfortable because they are still in prison, and it does feel exploitative, especially because they're still in prison and there was no consent regarding the family members, and that's the muddy thing.
Dirty.
That's the muddy thing about true crime, because if this were a fictional story or like inspired by, you know, then it would be different. There wouldn't be this much like gray area. I'm like, okay, like, how do we judge this piece of art? Do we have to judge it like in terms of the art itself, or like judge it in terms of its connection to the real world, right? But and just like for me, like, because I'm speaking of from a media like what's it called, stylistic, like filmmaking perspective. Even though I also didn't like Dahmer that much, but Dahmer was well made. Like, it had a style, it had also amazing acting, especially from Evan Peters. But Menendez, it just felt very glossy, like the way it was portrayed.
And they sexualized them
so much.
Like,
and
they were pieces of meat. Even I was like, oh my god, look at these guys.
Like, if they were trying to be empathetic to the brothers, Lyle's character just came off very unlikable and very sociopathic.
Which is not true. Lyle is such a beautiful person. Like,
and that felt very one-sided. Like, for a show that's intention was to show all different sides, that felt very one-sided.
Yeah.
To portray the protagonist that way.
We also,
right?
I want to also touch base on like their work in prison. Like, they could have shown their true colors in prison, but they're such good men. Like, no tattoos. Like, when people come from prison, especially 35 years in their case, tattoos everywhere. Like, you could tell that they're prison inmates, prisoners. But they did more good than wrong. Like, they were written up. Eric was written up 7 or 8 times. Lyle was written up 5 times. In 35 years, they were there for bad behavior or whatever. And a lot of it was about cell phone usage. Again, it wasn't stated that it was their cell phone. It was just like no one was confessing to it. So they got written up for having a cell phone, got written up for overly touching their partner, which again, they're both married, but in prison, you're not allowed to be too touchy. Eric was a nutcase, so he was involved in some fights where they had to break it up. And Lyle never fought. And that's why it's so weird, because in Netflix, they made him seem like somebody that kept saying the F word and like fighting and all that stuff, and yelling. He never fought. Like, he had to be put into a different area of the prison because he wasn't fighting back whenever people would pick on him. So he was done so dirty.
And the thing about Lyle that's depicted in the show that was upsetting was, which is sad, because it was also, in my opinion, one of the more thrilling parts of his character arc, but it turned out to not be true, was Lyle's defense attorney backing out of the second trial.
It showed like a huge fight that they had.
A huge fight, and like also like the thing about Lyle. What was it? Like he was talking to this fan.
Norma Novelli. So that
And
wasn't,
that wasn't
even
true,
that
right?
wasn't
Okay,
even
speak on that,
anything
Ate.
bad. Like she had a crush on him. She was like 20 years older than him, but she had a crush on him. And
20
like,
years older?
Yeah, and he would write to her and they would talk. Like she finessed him and just made a whole book of their conversations, and even took pictures of his letters onto her book. But it had nothing to do with him like being stupid and being like, oh my god, like see, I made them cry, I made the people cry, like I'm gonna get the jury so good. He never showed any chauvinistic characters. That was very fabricated. And
How do you know that it's fabricated?
Because I watched the whole trial, and a lot of his voice recordings with the conversations with her was just like, yeah, so this is what happened, and a little bit of flirting now and then, but it had nothing to do with him not being able to testify the second trial.
Yeah, and that was a big plot point in the show,
Yeah.
which was such a which is another like
Yeah.
poor representation.
So on the second trial, he just did not want to testify. He didn't want to do that again. That's why Leslie Abramson represented Erik the second trial, free, pro bono. Jill didn't want to because she was just so distraught about them losing the case. And again, doing that is extremely exhausting. Like I remember I had to go to court. It's exhausting. It's a long day. You get headaches, all for a jury to be hung. So she did not want to do that again. So she didn't represent him the second trial. And because of that, he's just like, because Jill left, like I don't want anybody to put me on the stand if it's not her. And also because he just could not get himself to bring that emotion and talk about his past again, which he I guess he kind of like ruined that. He did a beautiful testimony the first time, but it was just extremely hard, and he didn't want to embarrass his family again. He didn't want to do it again, and that's why he did not testify in the second trial. It wasn't because he screwed himself by exposing himself to this girl. It had nothing on him. It was just like little flirty texts and like little bits and pieces of how he felt, but nothing that that compromised him. So that was off.
The book was real though, right?
The book is real. Yeah, she did.
She wrote.
Yeah. She just wanted money off of him.
And I know we're speaking on it, but also like we're coming at this. I know my sister and I have a lot of energy.
Yeah.
And this is just how our dynamic is, and we're not afraid to have hard conversations, and we're not afraid to like,
Yeah,
just
and
be
call
real
out a show that
Yeah.
really did them dirty. And there's one question, again, like I had to fight off a lot of TikTok people and being like, you don't know anything. A huge question is like, why didn't they leave? They were adults.
Yeah.
They had money. They could have left. And I'm like, I fucking hate that question, because it's like, you have not been heavily abused to that magnitude for you to ask that question, which thankfully you, like, people who ask that question has never had that kind of abuse before.
Also, you hate it when people ask that question?
Yes,
like, why didn't they
because
run
it's
away?
so
Okay.
Yeah. It's stupid because, like, Justin Baldoni, who directed This Is Us, it was about domestic abuse.
It ends with us.
It ends with us, yeah, sorry.
This is us.
This is
Totally different show.
They asked him that. It's like, why can't women just leave? And then he's just like, we need to stop asking that question of why women don't leave and start asking the question of, like, why do men hurt? So let's put it back to the Menendez brothers. Why didn't they leave? They were adult men. Why didn't they leave? We need to start asking, why do parents abuse, sexually even? Why do they do that? Let's look and unpack that before putting it onto victim and saying like, oh, you should have left. Like, you clearly never went through abuse to ask that question, because they even stated in their testimony that like the reason why is because their father was a very strong, powerful man. They would have been found, and they really feared for their lives, and that they would kill him because of the secret that they had. So he's just like, I am not going to be known as a child abuser or a child. I'd rather be known as a murderer. That's what Lyle said. Wow. So they're like, it's done deal. Like, whether we leave or not, he's going to find us. He's going to make us go through more hell because we were trying to be gutsy to do that. When somebody knows that they don't have control over you anymore, they go freaking crazy and make your life a living hell. And we there's movies about that, showing that when people do leave, your life is ruined.
Exactly.
And I guess they just did what they had to do.
I didn't realize until after the show how young they were when they were going through all this. So they're literally like, even though they look much older.
Yeah, they did look much older. Yeah, I feel like in the
they were
90s, even
kids.
they were
Yeah.
a lot of the people back then looked a lot older than now.
They just turned into adulthood when they
yeah
did the murders, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
like they were really young,
Yeah.
and just
yeah
all those
so-
years of abuse. But in terms of why parents abuse, and especially why Jose and Kitty abuse, do you think it's a generational trauma thing? 'Cause-
Apparently, I can't speak on what they went through,
Yeah.
but apparently Jose went through abuse as well, but he's not here to speak on that. But he did tell Lyle, like, what I'm doing to you, you're going to do to your kids. And that screwed him up. So he kind of was planting generational trauma to him already. And that's why Lyle did what he did to Erik. He sodomized him in the woods because he wanted to see if it was normal, and he did it, and he's like, this is gross, it's not normal. And that's why they were so distraught about it, because they're like, my dad planted the seed that, like, what I'm going through with him, I'm gonna have with my kids. So when he did it to Erik, he's like, no, this is not normal. So yeah, and like, I understand they couldn't really, like, the families did testify and say, like, yeah, I noticed these things, but back then you don't talk about these things. Like, I remember growing up, I didn't want to talk about my learning disability and that I was fucking stupid and slow in school. Like, that's very shameful. Let alone, hey, my parents are like, you, like, I can understand the shame and the amount of, like, courage you would have to, like, say that to families. And I think that's why it was so embarrassing and so hard for them to be on the stand, because their parents are hearing the severities of what they went through. So, like, and mine was just a learning disability. I'm like, I can't understand anything. And I already felt shame for that. And little did I know that when I turned 33 years and years later, that it was undiagnosed ADHD. So for them, it's just like they went through these abuse when they were kids. And then when they were old enough to understand, like, hey, this is not normal. I can't run away. I'm going to shoot his ass. And and they're paying for it. And it's just so sad, because they could have gotten a manslaughter. I think it was just wrong place, wrong timing for them. Had it been a few years after, maybe the early 2000s, they could have gotten away with manslaughter. But it's just, I really hope justice is served and that they do get out of prison. And I don't know, let us know what you think about that. Yeah. And like there's a psychology component to, like, why kids kill their parents. Go into that. There's a psychologist named Joyce Brothers or whatever, Dr. Joyce Brothers, who say that this is a psychological thing, because feeling like they're trapped, feeling like the whole Stockholm syndrome, being in the guise of somebody that's so controlling and controls your life and tells you what to do and abuses you, like, you feel like that's your only thing. And when you want to get out of that, and when you build the brain capacity to understand that that's not normal, you kind of want to shut that off. And because you don't run away, you know that they're going to chase after you. So that's why kids kill their parents. And that's why people glamorize their parents being killed. Like Jeanette McCurdy, she wrote a book about, I'm glad my mom died, and she didn't commit murder, but she was happy about that because of her abuse and her story.
And people, like, applauded her and, like, gave her praise, and she became a
and it's
well-known
just like,
star
like, you know,
after the book.
Yeah, exactly. So there's reasons to that. And then the whole spending spree, it was clear that they didn't do it for money, because Lyle was ready to just go to Princeton. They gave him a condominium. He was good. He had the money. He could have just been like, sorry, I can't do anything. But he turned his life upside down for Erik, to help Erik, because of the situation. It wasn't about the money. And I needed, like, people need to realize the boys did not do that for money. It was because of, like, heavy abuse and it going on. And the fact that Jose was not letting Erik go to a dorm and have him stay here when he went to college. So he could keep abusing him.
You speak about how, like, they're, like, you empathize with them so much also, and you care, you feel this connection towards them, even though you don't know them personally, because they turned out to be really good guys instead of psychopaths.
No.
You think it's because they got love from other
I think so.
people that are not that they couldn't get from their parents, like extended family, like their girlfriends and all that?
Yeah. So, like, they had extended family. They had a lot of cousins. Again, they were in a privileged area, so they had access to better schools that had guidance counselors, and that's why a lot of the people that testified for them were family members, a lot of family members. So like they were still nurtured in a way, and that whole part in their life where they were abused by their parents, it didn't necessarily define them fully, because other people saved them from being bad people. So if you're ever going through abuse and you're not getting love and support from your parents, you could still be saved if you have other people in your life that can kind of catch you from that and give you that love, whether it's parents, grandparents, family members, teachers. That's why back in the 90s, it was all a village. Right now, there's not much of a village, but like they say that raising a child is a village. So like even Kitty, one of the doctors of Kitty or family members said that like whenever they wanted to go on vacation or whenever she didn't want to take care of the kids, she would just leave them to the families, to her in-laws, to the aunts and uncles. So like they had people. So I guess that's why they're still really good people. They're not entirely like Jose, and they're still doing great work in prison. They're making it look more like a college than a dark, gloomy prison. They're working with terminally ill inmates and are advocating for them to be put into a better side of the prison where they could be more able to do things and not with the rowdy crowds and stuff. Like they're advocating for a lot of inmates working on projects, and even inmates that left the prison are saying great things about them as well. So they're great people. And I really, like, you are so crazy if you think that they should still be in prison.
I want to end it off too by saying, like, yeah, we talked a lot of the different parts of this case in terms of how it's portrayed in the media and in real life. When it comes to true crime television shows, when it comes to that, like, don't take it as a first step. Don't believe everything at face value, because things are dramatized, sensationalized in media and in TV shows. I feel bad because I've only watched the Ryan Murphy TV show. I didn't even watch the Netflix documentary, which I feel like that's a much better representation of it.
100%.
I guess we would recommend, like, watch the documentary.
And watch the trials.
Do what my sister did. Do your research, learn about the case, and come to your own conclusions about, like, when you're fully educated on this issue. But from what you're saying, like, you've convinced me, and I'm sure you're going to convince a lot of people here that, like, after doing your research, you will see, like, why we should be having these conversations about abuse, and why we should believe these brothers.
Yeah, and just a takeaway for just life in general is, if you could take away something from this, is context matters. So there's always his side, my side, their side, her side, and the truth. And like, you need to get the whole context of why things happen and how they unfold. So context is important. Yeah.
Thank you for having me. This was so fun.
Thanks for coming for this episode.